So typically, we would have a longer run up to this. But this is before we get started, so this is a pre-message message. This is about to happen. We would have a longer run up. We would have a lot more detail. We would take a lot of time and kind of walk through a narrative to make a case for why this is important. However, we have none of that this morning. I'm simply going to make an ask of you, and I don't get any fancy things. I don't have a video to show you that's compelling. I don't have any of those things. All I have is an ask that I'm going to pass along to you that I feel like we should say yes to as a church. So for those of you who've been around for a while, you know that we have been the single largest provider of mentors for at-risk children in Coweta County. And we've been doing that since 2019. It's a big deal to us. And the reason it's a big deal to us is because we believe in the impact that it makes in the public school system when we meet with kids that are at risk. Now, I've had a lot of conversations with people for a long time that are upset with the public school system because you can't pray in schools. Or, hey, they took prayer out of schools. They took the 10 Commandments down. It's like, hey, and basically the phrase is they've taken God out of schools, right? That's the phrase. And so if you've ever said that, I've got great news. I've got great news for you this morning. The Coweta County public school system will allow people that can pass a background check, which means that you're not on the sex offender list, you're not an active drug dealer, that you're not someone who regularly steals things at gunpoint, right? We got to pass those basic standards. And if that includes if you're a Holy Spirit-filled follower of Jesus, they will let you come into the school system and you can have lunch with kids that they would classify as at risk. Jesus might call them the least of these. And here's the thing, this is the important thing for you to hear. If you've complained about God being out of the school system, this is an opportunity for you to do something about that because you're going to carry the Spirit of God with you no matter where you go, whether it's the school system or Kroger or Publix or Walmart, Target, whatever it is, right? He's going with you because he's a part of your life. And so we get an opportunity to do that. At-risk kids are at risk because they have one of three issues. The first one is there's a severe academic issue, and that's a problem. Or there's a severe behavioral issue, or there's a severe attendance issue. And once you fall into a threshold in one of those three categories, the likelihood of them graduating plummets. And so there are opportunities for those students to receive specialized or individualized care or assistance or just help would probably be the best word. And there's an organization called Elevate Coweta Students that runs this mentoring program. It took it over from the Coweta County school system 5 or 6 years ago. And so they facilitate the program to identify those students that are at risk and then pair them up with a mentor. This is what mentoring looks like. You go once a week and you have lunch with one of these kids that they have predetermined because of those thresholds. Hey, this is where they're at. And so they pair you with one of these kids and you have lunch with them. We are in 3 schools right now. We started in one. We started at Ruth Hill Elementary School. We're now at Ruth Hill Elementary School, Smoky Road Middle School, and Noonan High School. And so all 3 of those, and each one of them, if you go to Ruth Hill, you're going to Smoky. If you go to Smoky, you're going to Noonan High School. And so they kind of feed into each other. And so this is a big deal. Now here's the thing. This is what mentoring is not. Mentoring is not Captain America, you save the day. You go there, lunch is about 26 minutes and 30 seconds long. That's how long they get for lunch. 4 minutes of that, they're in line. So you're not even hanging out with them for the 4 minutes. Like you're sitting there waiting for them to come out with their little tray of rectangle pizza and ranch, and that's what they're gonna do, right? Or their bag of Doritos and sour cream that they're making walking tacos, which is just disgusting to watch them do. But it is what it is, especially when they're like first grade and they can't do it and it's everywhere. It's like, why am I here? You know, saying, oh, that's right, we're not here for tacos. We're here to talk, that's it. Here's the thing. In let's just say 21 minutes of actual time, you're not gonna get anything done. You're not. If that's what you're thinking, oh, I'm going to go and they're going to have the greatest conversation, that's not what mentoring is. However, if you show up once a week for a school year, that's not 21 minutes anymore. That's a lot of time. A lot of time. And you will rise to one of the top 3, maybe even 4 adults that will have spent consistent time with them in the last year. That's what it'll do. When you spend 20 minutes with them once a week, you will elevate yourself to one of the top 4, top 5 adults that have spent consistent time with them in their life, right? It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So Ruth Hill, because there's been a number of changes. A lot of kids have come into the school system they didn't anticipate. Ruth Hill and Smoky Road both reached out and said, hey, we have a need larger than we thought, and we thought we would ask you first. And so Ruth Hill needs 11 more mentors now. Smoky Road needs 10 more mentors now. So if you've got flexibility in your schedule, if you are a decision maker and you can make your schedule, if you have that ability, it's a commitment. It's once a week. When school system is in, it starts here in a couple of weeks is when they open the schools for mentoring. It's once a week. You have lunch with them. There's flexibility. So I do Thursdays, but if I can't make a Thursday, I let the site coordinator know. I just tell her what day I can make it that week. But routine kind of helps the kids. But Thursdays be it. But if I can't do Thursday, I'll move it to Wednesday or Tuesday. If you have to miss a week, it's okay, as long as you tell them ahead of time. What I don't want is I don't want the kid to go and sit at the lunch table waiting for you to come in all day, right? And they're just looking. Like, that doesn't feel good. But as long as you tell them ahead of time, hey, next week I'm on vacation. Next week I'm on a work trip out of town. It's fine. They just don't want to look forward to it sitting in the lunchroom. That's embarrassing because their mentor didn't show, their friend didn't show up, right? That doesn't feel good. But so there's a lot of flexibility with it. But if that's where you're at and you have the ability to gift 21-ish minutes a week to a kid that's at risk and you're a follower of Jesus, would you please do that today? We've made it simple. You can text the word mentor to 678-661-6330. And it will it doesn't even commit you to it. It just says, hey, I've got more questions that I would like for Jason to answer. And so Jason will call you back, and Jason is going to answer every single question you have. It's public school system, so it's a long process. You've got to go to a training where they're going to tell you what you can and can't do. It's all common sense, right? You're going to go to the training, and you're going to say, I already knew this was a waste of time, but it's a CYA thing for them, and they got to do it. So you got to go to the training, you got to sit there for an hour, and you got to listen to them say, hey, you can't do this to children, right? You can't talk about this with children. And they're like, yes, we know. That's right. It's normal things, but you got to go. They got to sign off saying you went to the training. You've got to get a badge with your picture on it that, says, hey, this is who I am. And you got to be able to pass that background check that says that you're not currently a felon or on a list somewhere. If you can do those three things, they'll put you in the school system, and it would be great. So we had 7 people sign up at the 9. I gave the same thing at the 9. And so we are 10, 11, it's 21. I need 14 people to sign up today, please. That would be fantastic. So if you have that flexibility and you just want to ask more questions, again, it doesn't commit you to it. It just says, hey, I'm committed to having a conversation. Let's do that. That took way longer than it was supposed to, even longer than the 9. So we're going to be here a while today. We're just going to call Jimmy John's. They're going to bring lunch in. I'm kidding. I'm going to go quick. All right, ready? Let's hop into this. Last 4 weeks, we've been talking about dotted lines. It's this metaphor that we've been working with. Dotted lines mean you can pass, right? There's a dotted line. You can get in the other lane. You can go past someone, and you can continue. If it's a solid line, it's a no-no. It's like a no, do not pass. You can't come over into this lane. It's a no-go. You got to stay where you're supposed to be. And it doesn't matter how inconvenient it is that the solid line is there. You're supposed to follow the law. However, we have said over and over again, we can do what we want. Like, it's our car. We can just swerve over, and we can get around them. We hope maybe we might get a ticket. Maybe we don't. Maybe we get away with it. I think more than likely we get away with it a lot. However, that's just the rules, right? Solid lines you don't cross, dotted lines you cross. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if any of you, I'm just speaking for my own self, and I'm talking specifically, mostly, I think, in my mind to fellas, but don't be offended if this also qualifies to you ladies. Does any of you fellas have like an aggressive spirit when you're driving sometimes, that it just kind of comes out, and you're just fairly aggressive, and your passenger princess is not as aggressive as you is? I don't know if that's something that relates. And so you'll be in one of those spaces where it's a solid line. Solid line is there, and she can probably feel it. She can feel it. She's like, he's about to try to pass this guy. And it's a solid line. And so before you even hit the gas, she reaches over and grabs your arm and says, let's just wait. Let's just wait. Let's just hold on. Let's just chill just for a second, because she can feel it coming. And she's like, we've got time. I don't have time. I don't have time. Why did everybody jump? Were y'all not paying attention? Yeah. The restrooms are right over there if you need them. Like a whole section right here just did this. Yeah. Right? That's what happens, right? the thing we're talking about today is just like that situation I just walked you through. There are so many people in your life that can see what you're about to do. And they will tell you, hey, this is not a good thing. Don't do this. This is not a good place to make this little maneuver happen. This is not good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for the children in the back. And they can see it. And they're right. But so many times in this particular situation, this is why we waited to the last one, because this is the hardest. And you're thinking, how could it be harder than time and money and sex, which is what we've been talking about the last 3 weeks. Those boundaries. This is extremely, extremely difficult. And it's because everyone else in our world sees it. Everyone else in our world says, this is a bad thing. However, it's the thing where everyone else sees it and we just tend to ignore it. We're just like, don't touch me when I'm driving. And then we swerve over, push the gas, and we do it our own way. The problem is 4 dotted lines that should be solid. Week 1 was time. Week 2 was money. Week 3 was sexuality. Week 4. Today we're going to talk about 6 should be solid lines for your relationships. Now, this is not relationships like exclusive to romantic relationships. Not really getting into that. This is relationships across the board. So this can be a relationship with your parents. It could be a relationship with a significant other. It could be a relationship with your siblings. It could be a relationship with friends, family, like just across the board. Any relationship that you have at all, this is what we're talking about, right? Now, here's the deal. There's 6 solid lines that should be in place that are biblical, that should be in place in all of our relationships. And we're going to walk through them one at a time. First one is this. Honesty is essential. That should be a solid line. Like, hey, lies limit my ability to help and interact, right? So if we're going to interact in a relationship, I can't do a thing where you only tell me the truth like half the time. Like, you're going to tell me the truth, especially if you're asking for my help, right? If you're a friend, if you're a sibling, if you're a family member, and you're asking for me to help, you can't ask me to help and then lie to me about why you need the help or exactly what it is I'm helping with because you're afraid I'll say no if I know the truth, right? If we have a relationship, if you trust me enough, if you feel like, hey, I could actually be a solution to this and you want me to be involved, then we need the truth, right? The truth is essential to what we're doing. In other words, you know what? You're asking me to jump in this lake with you, but it smells like dog dookie. And you're trying to tell me it's not dog dookie, it's just a paper plant close by. And it's like, no, I'm pretty sure it's the water you're swimming in. You're like, no, the water's fine, but I can smell it. Like, you can't, let's not do that. Just tell me I'm in a lake of just dog mess, and I would like for you to swim with me, right? Just be honest and say, look, I put myself in this situation, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it to you. I'm just telling you, I actually need help. I need help in this mess that I'm in. Tell me the truth. Let's just be honest. Truth matters. Second solid line. Abuse is unacceptable. Unacceptable. There's no situation or scenario where the next healthy step for you to get healing, if you've been someone who's been abused, involves allowing them to abuse you again. There's none. So if you're thinking of a plan, like, okay, let me walk through a plan of how I get some healing from my abuser, and your plan starts with, I'm going to let them do it one more time, and then we're going to have a conversation. That's not it. No, there is no plan to healing that begins with you being abused again to get to the next step. It doesn't exist. And abuse is absolutely unacceptable, whether it's emotional abuse or verbal abuse, especially physical abuse. Like, it's just not going to happen. We're not going to do those things. Like, that's a solid line, and I don't want you crossing it. But hey, here's the thing. You all know this is the perfect example of there's someone who cares and loves you sitting in the passenger seat next to you, and they can see that you are crossing a line or someone is crossing your line into your lane, and they're like, hey, this isn't a good idea. And you're like, don't touch me. I'm driving, right? This is my life. Don't tell me. But everybody else in your world can see it. Everybody else can see what's happening, and they're trying to tell you, stop. Don't let this happen. Let's get help. And in your mind, you've decided some version of this if I do something that brings healing to me, it's going to hurt them, and I can't bear to hurt them. Right? Talking about the abuser, from the person that's being abused to the abuser. That's what we think. If I do something to heal me from being abused, it's going to end up hurting the person abusing me, and I just can't fathom hurting them. Do you hear how crazy that is? Like, abuse is like a nice word for you're being hurt, right? That's what's happening. So you have decided, I can't hurt them because I would rather them continue to hurt me than them be hurt at all. That's what we're saying. And it's no good. It's a no-go. Third, time isn't to be wasted. Now, we talked about this week 1, right? The psalmist says in Psalm 90:12, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so what we're saying there, if you weren't here for week 1, let me just summarize it real quick. It says, hey, when we see the heart of wisdom, anytime we see the word wisdom from a biblical standpoint, it means we want to think like God thinks. Wisdom is the way God thinks, the way God processes. And so it says, hey, will you teach me to number my days so that I can think, I have a heart like God thinks. And so what he's doing here is saying, look, all of us count up. We have birthdays, we get larger numbers, right? Some of us don't. Some of us have been 29 for a long time, you know what I'm saying? But most of us count up, you know, and another year comes in December 29th, I'll be 41 years old, right? December 29th, I'll be 41. And then the next year, December 29th again, I'll be 42. So I'm counting up. I have no idea when that number stops, but at some point it stops, right? God doesn't do that. God counts down. God sees whatever the last breath is because he's already there. He's present in the moment, and he sees this is how long you've got until you 100% belong to me, or you get what you want and you don't have to see me anymore, right? That's the way God views time. He counts down to it. He counts down to it. And so the psalmist says, hey, will you teach me to see my days the way you see my days? That way I value my days the way you value my days. The illustration I gave you was my son likes to play baseball. He comes in, says, hey, let's go throw. He always wants to throw when I'm very tired. And it would change my perspective if I knew how many times left he was going to ask me to throw. Like if it's 1,500, it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just tired today. It's not going to happen. But if it's like double digits, or maybe even single digits, it doesn't matter what has happened, right? If I only get 6 more asks, and I've already been told this is my future, he's going to ask you 6 more times to come throw the baseball, it doesn't matter what I've done. I'm going to stop and go do it. And that's the way that the psalmist is saying, hey, here's the deal. See your days the way God does. So when we talk about our friends and the way or our family members, the way we involve ourselves in their relationships, we're saying, look, our time is valuable. So I'm not going to invest it into some things that's a lot of dishonesty. I'm not going to invest it in some things where there's abuse that's happening. My time matters. Next piece, number 4. Confidentiality matters. In other words, I'm not your tea dealer so that you can be the community tea spiller, right? Like if we're going to have a conversation about what's going on in my life, you're not going to go have the conversation with 30 other people because it makes you feel better because now I've got some dirt, right? That I'm not going to feed your gossip sauce and your addiction to it. Like we're not going to do that. So I don't want to share things with you that you go share with a bunch of randos or with my other friends that I decided I didn't feel comfortable sharing with. Like we're not going to do those things. 5, I can say no and still love you. Here's the truth. Someone that's in the middle of something in our relationships that they need help with, they are not aware of every circumstance in your own life. They're not aware. How could they be? How could they be? They have no idea. They have no clue what's happening. When someone is reaching out and asking for help, a lot of times, especially when it feels like it's desperate, they have tunnel vision. All they can see is the one thing that's consuming their life right now. And it's difficult for them to see anything else on the peripheral. They just can't see it. And so when they think about you and your life, they're like, why would you not stop everything to help me with this thing? Because I can't think about anything other than this thing. Right now, this is front and center. And this is the biggest thing in my life. Why would you not stop everything to help me? Well, the thing is you don't even know what everything is. You have no idea what's happening and what else. Who else has asked me to jump in because of a huge issue? You have no idea where else I've decided to say yes to something. You just don't know. The other truth is, beyond just the idea that we have limits, we all have a capacity. The truth is sometimes saying no is the very best way to love someone. Last one. I will follow through. In other words, if I'm going to be a Jesus follower, I'm going to follow through. If I tell you something, I'm going to do it. You don't need from me a pinky promise. It doesn't mean anything more than just, yes, sir, I'll be there. You don't need me to spit on my hand and do a little thing. You don't need me to cut my hand and do a blood oath. Like, you don't need anything other than that from me. If I tell you I'm going to do something, then your expectation ought to be, I'm going to do something. If I tell you I can't do something, your expectation of me should be, he ain't going to do it. That's what it ought to be. Here's the deal. I can be trusted to say yes and to say no and mean it. I also will not be the guy. You should not be the guy that will overpromise and underdeliver. That can't be who we are. That's got to be a solid line. So we're not going to say yes to things we know it's just out of our realm of possibility just because we feel bad saying no. We're not going to say yes to things knowing that there's very little chance I can deliver on this. I already know my capacity. I don't think I can take on anything else. I will follow through. As we've looked at these solid lines, and we've been looking at solid lines all 4 weeks, they're a problem because they become dotted lines. And with that, we always want to give solution that's biblical. And the solution always ends up being a mindset. It's not necessarily a set of steps to take. And the mindset is, hey, it happens up here. In other words, the way we solve all of these dotted line issues happens between our ears. It's a decision we're going to make internally in our brains, and that's going to inform the action we take. This is, hey, this is how I solve this problem. So when we think about a mindset, we want to just simply ask Jesus, how do we handle relationships and people? And he gives some pretty incredible insight. Let's take a look in Matthew 22. Jesus says this, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now we're going to get there, right? But let's just take it chunk by chunk for a second. He says, hey, there's a first and greatest commandment. In other words, and it's not love your neighbor as yourself, by the way. The first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. In other words, before we can love our neighbor the way God wants us to love our neighbor, you have to love God. Before you can address anyone else's needs in the very best way, you have the potential to do that. You've got to address the need that you have to have a right relationship with God. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't address other needs. It just means that you're actually not going to be able to do the very best thing that you would have the potential to do unless you get a right relationship with God first. Because God's going to inform how all of that takes place. God's going to inform how you interact. God's going to inform the endurance and the perseverance that you have to engage in someone else's issues. The truth is, when we take a look at this actually gives us some freedom. This has nothing to do with the other person in the relationship. You can do the right thing first without anyone else's permission. You can take care of your own relationship with God before you try to solve anyone else's problems. I mean, it's simple. You've got to love God first. And doing this teaches us how to love others well. But the second commandment does say, love your neighbor as yourself. And that is clear, isn't it? Like, I mean, you can't get any clearer than that. Like, love my neighbor, got it. Okay, well, that's not clear. How would we love our neighbor? You should love them as you love yourself. Okay, that makes it a little clearer. That actually helps. That's a bigger deal than just like, I love you. No, how would you want to be loved? But it also makes very clear that God comes first and people come second. I think the best way to explain this, when I was back in middle school, we were being taught test-taking strategies for standardized tests. And one of the strategies that they would teach you is, hey, if there's a timed test, what you want to do is you want to read the entire test. You want to go through the entire test first. Because there are likely things in the middle or towards the end that you are so good at, you know so well. And so you want to knock out those things first, because if you're going to sit and wait and get stuck on something, you don't want to run out of time and not be able to answer the things that you know so well. So go do the things you know really well first, and then start working the things that you're kind of stuck on. That way, for sure, you maximize the number of points that you can get, right? That's one of the things. And so to do this, to kind of hammer this home, they would give us tests to practice some of these strategies. There was other strategies, but this was one of them. And so when they were trying to make sure that this kind of hammered into our minds, it was in middle school, they gave us the test, and they just reminded us, hey, just remember, read all the directions, read the entire test, figure out where you need to get started after you've read it, and then work through the other little pieces that we've got for test-taking strategies. And so I started doing the test. And I remember the very first one that I did, I was doing it. I was killing it. I was feeling pretty good. I could look around. Not that I was cheating or anything like that, but I could look around and see that I had gotten to the back parts of the page. At that time, we took tests on paper. It was wild. It wasn't a Chromebook. Like, you just flip pages. Oh, that's real. Okay. At first, I thought someone, that's all right. He's welcome, or she's welcome. Love dogs. Okay. It did throw me off, though. It did throw me off. I'm not gonna lie. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's not good. That's not good. Sorry. So I was taking this test. I was looking around, and I could tell, I was like, hey, I'm flying. I'm flying through this test. I was pumped. I'm getting close to the end. I get to the last question. Guess what the last question said? It wasn't a question. Write your name at the top of the paper and turn your test in. I thought I would have learned my lesson. I didn't. I was taking a math test. Same little thing. All the teachers were doing this thing. Doing a math test. I was like, you know what? And here's the instructions. Read the directions. Read the entire thing. I looked at it and I was like, I've learned my lesson a little bit. I flipped through it just to make sure. I was like, I know all of this. Every single little section in the math thing, I was like, I'm really good at all these things. I'm about to slay this test. And so I just start killing it. And I'm knocking it out. 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 And I go, done, finished, turned it in. Nothing in the last question. Turn it in. It's like, boom. I get my test back. C. And like, there's zero chance. There's no chance. No chance I've missed that many questions on this math test. Like, maybe I might make one mistake. But this wasn't even hard math. Like, it was simple math. And math was my thing. And so like, there's no chance. I start looking at it. I'm like, she hasn't even marked any wrong. These are all, I was like, clearly my teacher's been drinking when she's grading this paper. These are right. And I go and I take it to her and she says, hey, no, I'm sure that the answers are right, but did you read the directions? And the directions said, only answer the odd number of questions. And if you don't, it's an automatic C. Dang it! That's the way this works. That's the way this works. God is the instructions. He tells us how to deal with the test or the people. And so we might look at the people and say, I've got a plan. But the thing is, we've got to read the instructions. We might feel like we've got the answers to everything, but God is saying, but I've got specific instructions for how you need to approach these problems. And so if we just decide we're experts and just jump in, God is saying, look, there are things you're missing, not because your answers aren't in the right direction. And honestly, on an island, the answer might actually be decent. But you're not on an island, and they're not on an island. And I've got things that you need to know as you entertain the opportunity to help someone that will inform how you approach that, which involves much more than just that single solitary issue in that moment. We might also get hung up at the idea of love your neighbor as you love yourself, and maybe we don't know how to love ourselves. But once again, God will teach you. When we get to know the heart of God, we also get to know what we really are worth. He shows us what our value is. He also is very upfront about our imperfect nature and our brokenness. But he establishes the reality that even though we have an imperfect nature and a brokenness, our value is still through the roof. And those two things can exist at the same time. God also will teach us about our potential. Potential we didn't even know we had. You know, God gives us not only this instruction about love God first and then love people like you love yourself so that he can inform how those things happen. God also makes very clear a list of priorities. Maybe the list could be titled God-informed priorities. And this list is pretty important to him. And we could just make a biblical case that just shows when it comes to our relationships and how we want to interact with them, that they come in a very particular order. The first one on the top of the list is God, right? He already said that the first and greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. And so he goes at the first, and he's like, look, you got to take care of this relationship before you can move to anything else on the list. If you really do want to take care of everyone else that's going to be on this list, you've got to take care of number one first, which is not even you, it's God. The second one on the list, if this is part of your season of life, is your spouse. And then number two on the list. And there's no switching this. You don't get to substitute your spouse for somebody else. Your spouse goes in the second place. The third one is your children, right? Children are third on the list. That's where they're at. That's where they belong. That's where they should be. The fourth, everybody else can get in line. Everybody else can get in line, you know? Maybe you could just do like a bid it to win it kind of thing. I don't know, make some money. Now, you might say, hold on 1 second. But kids are so young, right? They need me. So during that season, I just take my spouse, I move them down to number 3, and I move my kids up to number 2. People do it all the time. And they do it, why? Because they love their kids. But the truth is, I can make a pretty good case you don't actually love your kids. At least not as much as you think. Because if you actually love them as much as you think, you would know they've got to see what a healthy relationship between a husband and a wife look like. And they've got to see what that prioritized looks like. And they've got to grow up in a home where that is essential to what life is supposed to be. And that if you were to elevate them to a place they didn't belong, even if you did it out of love, you're actually just causing harm. There's also a really good chance your children will never leave if you do that. Which you might be thinking, that's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing. That is a bad thing. Our job as parents is to help them grow into who God wants them to be. Not to become our little security blanket because we're sentimental. You know, this also creates issues when our kids get families of their own. When they go and marry someone else. And all of a sudden, it's like, let's just pretend you got a son. And the son marries this great girl, and you're like, oh, she's so great. She's so awesome. What a great addition to our family. And all of a sudden, her family lives a little far away. And so it's Thanksgiving. And you're like, hey, here's the deal. We have Thanksgiving here at 1 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day. Okay? And so little Missy, I know you're new to this family, but you're going to have to tell your mom and dad that this family's important. You know what I'm saying? That's what you're going to have to do. And of course, then she's thinking, how do I respond to this? Do I just put one in the head and make it quick? Or do I? She didn't do that. No, she wouldn't do that. I'm kidding. Just two in the chest, one in the head. That's it. No, you wouldn't do that. No, you wouldn't do that. Right? But she got a decision to make. But the truth is, like, they've created their own little family. And it's important to respect that. If you're a parent and this is something that you struggle with, here's my advice. I would make it irresistible to come to your house for Thanksgiving. That might mean some of you need to learn how to cook a turkey, which is fine, right? Like, you're just not very good at it, you know? No, that's what I would do. I would figure out, how do I make it to where they don't want to miss? But then I would also be incredibly gracious. And I know I'm not the guy, because my kids are still young. He's 13. And so hopefully we have at least, 30 years until my daughter gets married. She's 11. Right? At some point, I'm going to have to give a shot at practicing what I preach. But even if I'm terrible at it, doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do. Boundaries. Priorities. Truth is that when you get married, you make a promise: sickness, health, richer, poor, better, worse. When you have children, you accept a responsibility that God has given you. Whether you birth them or you sign papers to love them like you birthed them. That you've made a commitment and are taken on a responsibility to do that. Which means that you have also decided that I want to do this the way God wants me to, which is God, spouse, and my children. Which means that anyone else that asks for anything has to get in line. And you don't give away those priority spots to someone else. You might love them a lot, but you can't love them more than your spouse. You might care for them a lot, but you can't love them more than your children. And I mean that for all of you. As much as I love our church and I love being a pastor, I can't love any of you at the expense of losing my wife. And I can't love pastoring our church at the expense of losing my children. It doesn't matter how important the task, and I think the church is a really important task. It doesn't matter how important those things are. Before I decided this was going to be my life, God had a plan for it and included Brooke and Emerson and Hadley. And who knows what this third one's going to be named in December. The writer of Proverbs says this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Now, what that means is we're not talking about, hey, eat Cheerios and watch your cholesterol, although we should probably all do that. But it's saying, hey, the heart is kind of where who you are sits and exists. And so in terms of your priorities and how you interact with other people and relationships, it's saying, hey, you need to guard that. You need to be aware that there are people that are stuck in really difficult situations in our lives that wouldn't think twice about saying, hey, just bump number 2 over for a season and let me sit there. And the thing is that that's not the way things are supposed to be. And the truth is, that's not really what they want. They want the best of you, and the best version of you is the most aligned with God that you can be. And then they get the best of you. And so we have to guard it. The truth is, the Bible also tells us that in 1 Corinthians, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. That if we're not careful, we help other people at our own expense. But we also have to sit in tension with that reality, as well as Galatians 6, which says this: carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Now, what's important here when we start to look at these really tough, difficult passages about relationships with each other, it says carry. It doesn't say take ownership of. Right? So that's not going to be something that you're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to jump in here and this is going to belong to me. Like, I'm going to start figuring out how to make all these things happen. That's not what the church planter is saying here in Galatians. He's saying, look, no, I actually do want you to share some burdens with people that are close to you. That's a biblical way of living. However, that being said, he's also assuming that you have a right relationship with God, which puts you in the very best place to help share someone else's burden. Like, if you're not spiritually healthy, emotionally healthy, then you're not going to be healthy enough to carry someone else's burden. You will start taking ownership of something that doesn't belong to you, because that's the way it works, especially those of us who might be people feelers or people pleasers. All of a sudden, and it turns into codependency, right? That's what that is. It's like, okay, well, I want to help. I can help. I have the ability to help. I have the desire to help. And now I'm jumping in, but I wasn't in a healthy place. Truth is, I needed help before I got there. And because of this, I'm not actually helping at all. I'm just prolonging. I'm extending the suffering because this needs to come to an end. There needs to be a rock bottom, but I am making this cushion down here that says I can tell we're at the bottom, but it's not as bad as I thought because I'm trampling all over you, and this is decent for me. It's a difficult spot to be in. And Jesus, I think, addresses this best when it comes to how we ought to interact with people in relationships that cross boundaries or set boundaries. He tells the story that I think is just brilliant. However, I will tell you, we tend to overlook some of these details. He says this: a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and then went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now, it's a picture of exactly what we're supposed to do as followers of Jesus with people. Incredibly inconvenient. Now, we see the first 2 guys, the priest and the Levite. Both of them are religious people. And they're supposed to have this relationship with God that informs how they ought to interact with someone in trouble. And they come by and they say, you know what, it's a little too inconvenient. This is going to mess up my religious traditions. And so I'm going to pass by on the other side. So they go past. Then we have a third guy who is not religiously affiliated. He comes and he sees the guy and he decides, I'm going to interact. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to do something about this. And so that's what he does. And did you see what he did? He stops where, I don't know where he was going. Jesus doesn't tell us, but he stops progress on where he was going. He tends to the guy. He makes sure that he's all right. And then he takes him to an inn, a place where he can lay down and get some care. And the very next morning, though, he wakes up and he looks at the guy and he's like, all right, I've got things that I've already committed to. And so I'm going to continue to go do those things. He tells the innkeeper, I'm going to pay for this. I'm going to be back. If there's more charges, I'm going to take care of it. But I've already given some yeses out to some people, and I've got things to tend to, but I'll be back. And that's the way we ought to work with people. Now, you might say that the guy looks at the guy and says, wait, you're leaving me? You're leaving me right now in this inn? Like, I don't know any of these people. Like, well, you didn't know me either yesterday, you know what I'm saying? Like, but you're leaving me? And he's like, yeah, I'm leaving you because I know in your world, nothing else has happened, but I was actually going somewhere yesterday. Now, I didn't go there yesterday because you're important and you matter and you have value. And what I've done is I've stopped what I was doing. I put my life on pause for a day, and I jumped in with you, and I triaged the situation. You are no longer going to die. Like, you're okay. And I've also given some steps. I said, hey, you don't have to stay in this inn. You can get up and walk out. But if you choose to stay, I'm going to be back. I'm going to take care of the bill. Right? I'm going to come back. If you rack up some more charges that you haven't yet, which is his choice, the guy can get up and leave, no more charges, or he can stay, get a little care for. He's like, I'm going to be back. But there's some things I've still got to do. That's what it's supposed to look like. And that's the way Jesus describes someone interacting with someone else. And honestly, this guy didn't even have a relationship with him, but he's paying money, he's inconvenienced himself with his time. That makes sense. But the guy didn't just say, you know what? That's it. That's it. You have this need, and so I'm going to start breaking every other commitment and all the other words that I gave to anybody else. Sure, I don't know what he was supposed to be doing the day before when he stopped and inconvenienced himself. Somebody was disappointed. Maybe he had to make a call, shoot a text message. I don't know what they were doing first century. Send a pigeon. I'm not sure. But he also made a decision. I've got some boundaries. You're not dying. You have an option. It's up to you what you want to do next. If you still want me to help, I'm willing to foot the bill for this care. If you want to go somewhere else, if you're done, you're okay to do that. That's the way we've got to interact. Jesus informed his approach. He sacrificed, but not at the expense of his entire world. He risked loss, but he didn't risk the responsibilities God had already given him. And it's a tension that we sit in when it comes to how we have boundaries with other people. And I think the solid lines, that list of 6 solid lines, that should help frame how do we respond and interact, right? That should frame how do we want to jump in and be a part of this? Because we're not gonna all of a sudden just be derelict in our responsibilities to our spouse or our children or to the things that matter to us because there's some emergency. Like, let's make sure they're okay. Let's do the triage. Make sure they're not dying anymore. And then we've got to continue to go with a really healthy set of next steps for how we're going to interact. There's no doubt in my mind that healthy boundaries are biblical. But there's also no doubt in my mind that we have to allow God to teach us how those boundaries should be put in place. And that means that if God's doing the teaching, we're not letting the person doing the asking teach us how we must interact with them. No, we're going to come from a place of principle and a mindset that aligns with Jesus, because God's already given us everything we need to know, to learn how to interact with anyone. And so tragedy and emergency will not be our teachers. God will. Jesus will. And if we invest in that relationship on the front end, we will be prepared for whatever tragedy or emergency comes up with the people we care about. And then we will have confidence that even if they don't agree sometimes with how we approach their situation, we can have confidence that God is honored in the way that we approach their situation. And then sometimes it's just their choice. It's just their choice. This is hard because the truth is, no matter how much money you have or how much love you have for someone, there are some things you can't do or accomplish for them. Especially for those of you who have family members that are sitting and suffering through addiction. It's been something that's been a part of my life since I was born. My very first attempt at helping someone that cared for me in their addiction that's been going on for 35 years was when I was 5. I found some pills. I knew that she had an addiction issue. I found some pills and I was going to throw them away. I was 5. I didn't read all that well, and so it was just Tylenol, and I didn't know that. But I did. I found the boxes, and I snuck into the kitchen, and she was in there. I put them behind my back, and I slid over to the trash can, and I dropped them in the trash can, thinking, you know what? Pills are not going to take her from me. "35 years later, not much has changed. Doesn't matter how much you love somebody. Doesn't matter how much money you have to throw at their problem. It's their choice. The very best thing we can do is allow God to inform who we are and allow God to inform how we should interact with other people. And then we can close our eyes, fall asleep at night with a peace that we've honored God with everything that we have. And we'll just keep praying that those individuals would wake up to the reality that there's people who love and care for them, and everybody else sees it but them. And that's just the best we can do. For sure, I can't give up my wife and my children to solve someone else's problem that they don't want to be solved or that they don't think is a problem. And that creates a tension in our lives that often creates a lot of unrest. And I think all of us can probably agree that when we experience that, we then have a great context for why there's this promise of a peace that passes all understanding. It doesn't make sense that I would be okay with this reality, but I'm okay with it because I know I've done everything God's asked me to do, and I feel at peace with the steps that He's led me to take. And I know without a shadow of a doubt, if God gives me a new step, my answer is going to be yes, sir.